The day Emily Carter brought home 86 neglected alpacas, half the town slowed down on the dirt road to watch her ruin herself. Her old white pickup rattled through the front gate of Carter Farm, dragging a rusted livestock trailer behind it. Dust rolled up in a brown cloud and drifted across the ditch grass. Inside the trailer stood 86 alpacas nobody else had wanted at auction. Their fleece hung in dirty mats. Their ribs showed under the wool. Some had bare patches on their skin. Some had toenails so overgrown they could barely stand straight. A few leaned against the trailer wall, like standing itself was the last bit of strength they had left. 3 trucks stopped along the road before Emily even backed up to the old sheep barn. Ray Donner leaned against his Chevy and shook his head. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. James Carter's girl bought herself a circus. A man from the feed store laughed through his open window. "Those things don't look like livestock. They look like wet laundry with legs." Emily heard him, but she did not turn around. She climbed out in dusty jeans, her father's old ball cap pulled low over her brown hair. The brim shaded her eyes, but it could not hide how tired she looked. Her hands were red from gripping the wheel all the way home. She opened the trailer door slowly and spread clean straw across the barn entrance. For a moment, the alpacas did not move. They blinked from the dark trailer, afraid of another strange place and another strange hand. Emily stepped aside and waited. The first alpaca came down with shaking legs, then another, then 5 more. Soon the whole neglected herd shuffled into the barnyard, silent except for the soft thud of padded feet on dry earth. A woman near the mailbox sighed. That poor girl, her daddy would have known better. Emily counted every animal under her breath. 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. Then she closed the gate. Behind her, Carter Farm looked like a place already halfway surrendered. The farmhouse paint was peeling. The porch leaned. The barn roof sagged. The old Ford tractor sat behind the machine shed with one flat tire and a tarp over the engine. Beyond it, 42 acres of tired pasture stretched yellow and brittle under a sky that had forgotten how to rain. To everyone watching, Emily had just spent the last of her money on a herd of problems. But Emily was not looking at the laughter. She was looking at the ground beneath the alpaca's feet. Carter Farm had not always been dying. When Emily was little, the pastures turned green in spring, and her father's cattle moved across the hills like dark beads on a string. Her grandfather had raised sheep there before that. There had been hay fields, a small orchard near the north draw, and a creek that ran long enough each year to make the cottonwoods shine. But drought, debt, and bad years had worn the farm down. Emily's father, James Carter, had tried to keep it alive long after the numbers stopped making sense. When cattle prices dropped, he borrowed against the land. When hay prices rose, he sold equipment. When the irrigation pump failed, he patched it with scrap parts. Every season took something from him. A baler one year, a hay wagon the next, then half the herd, then almost all of it. Then came the stroke. It happened in February, in the calving shed, on a morning so cold the water buckets froze solid. By nightfall, Emily was at the hospital. By the end of the week, she had left her job in town and moved back into her childhood bedroom. She helped her father learn to lift a spoon again. She sorted medical bills at the kitchen table. She listened to the farm settle at night, every pipe knock and roof creak sounding like another thing about to fail. The bank letters came in April. By May, the last of the beef herd was gone. By June, Carter Farm was nearly empty. The pastures had been grazed too hard for too many desperate seasons. Rain, when it came, ran across the surface instead of soaking in. The soil crusted gray after storms, then cracked open in the heat. Cheatgrass and thistle filled the bare places. The north draw, once cool and green in Emily's memory, had become a hardpan scar. At the feed store, men who had known her since she was 8 explained farming to her like she had never walked a pasture in her life. One morning, while she bought fence clips and mineral salt, Ray Donner tapped the counter. "Emily, there ain't shame in selling before the bank does it for you." Another man near the coffee machine added, A farm don't care how much you love it. It either pays or it don't. Emily picked up her box of supplies. The clerk asked, "Need anything else?" "Dewormer," Emily said, "and iodine." Ray frowned. "For those alpacas." Emily nodded. He shook his head. "You can't save land with notebook ideas and sick animals." She carried the box outside without answering. At night, after helping her father into bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table and read through boxes of old farm notebooks. Her father watched from his recliner, one hand curled against his chest, his speech slow and broken. In a green notebook with water stains along the edges, she found her grandfather's pasture maps. They were rough pencil sketches marked with dates, rainfall notes, arrows, and warnings. He had marked places where water held longer, places where sheep had grazed too close, places where soil stayed soft after summer storms. On one page, written years later in her father's handwriting, one sentence had been underlined twice. "The land does not need heavier animals. It needs lighter feet and longer rest." Emily ran her thumb over the words. From the recliner, her father whispered, "North draw." She looked up. His mouth struggled. "Still water. Under there." Emily turned back to the map. A thin pencil line curved across the low pasture north of the barn. Beside it, her grandfather had written, "Spring seep, protect from trampling." 3 weeks later, Emily saw the auction listing. The alpacas had come from a failed hobby farm 2 counties south. The former owner had bred them when fiber prices looked promising, then neglected them when money ran out. By the time they reached auction, most buyers avoided them. They looked fragile, sick, and expensive. At the auction rail, Emily watched them shuffle under the lights. She saw dirty fleece and bad feet, but she also saw animals light enough not to pound her damaged soil into concrete. She saw manure she could compost. She saw fleece that might one day sell to hand spinners in Bend. She saw a herd that could move through small paddocks, grazing weeds without tearing roots from the ground. And she saw living creatures that had been failed by the person who owned them. When the bidding fell quiet, the auctioneer asked, "Nobody wants the group?" A man behind Emily laughed. "Nobody wants that vet bill." The auctioneer dropped the price again. Emily lifted her number. Heads turned. "You bidding on the whole lot, miss?" Emily swallowed. "Yes, sir." Someone behind her muttered, "That girl just bought herself a bankruptcy notice." By evening, all 86 alpacas belonged to her. The first weeks were ugly. The alpacas did not become beautiful just because they had been rescued. They kicked when she trimmed their feet. They spat when frightened. They crowded the corners of the barn whenever a truck passed. Some were too weak to compete for feed, so she separated them into smaller groups. She sheared the worst mats by hand because she could not afford a professional crew. The fleece came off in filthy slabs full of burrs, manure, and cheatgrass seeds. Underneath, some animals were thinner than she feared. Their hips showed. Their necks looked narrow and breakable. The county agent, Mark Ellis, came by after hearing the news. He looked at the animals, the rotten fence posts, and the dry pasture beyond. "Emily," he said carefully, "you know what you took on?" "I do. These animals need footwork, parasite checks, clean water, shelter, better feed. And your pasture's already stressed." "That's why I bought them." Mark stared at her, waiting for more. Emily said nothing. The banker called that same week. "Miss Carter," Paul Whitcomb said, "compassion is admirable, but compassion does not satisfy alone." Emily held the phone between her shoulder and ear while filling a bucket with warm iodine water. "No," she said, "work does." There was a pause. 30 days past the next deadline, we begin foreclosure review. "I understand." When she hung up, her father lifted his good hand and tapped the green notebook resting on his lap. Emily understood. She did not have to defend herself to men at the feed store. She had to defend the land. So she worked. One crya was so small he seemed made of sticks and damp wool. His legs trembled constantly. His ears looked too large for his head. Emily named him Button because one dark eye looked like it had been sewn onto his face. Button tried. That was what broke her. He tried to stand when she entered the stall. He tried to nose the bottle, even when his mouth was too tired to close. He tried to follow the others, stumbling 3 steps before folding into the straw. For 9 days, Emily lived around his breathing. She warmed towels before sunrise. She slept beside the stall with an alarm set every 2 hours. She mixed formula at 3 in the morning while the kitchen light buzzed overhead. Once, she carried him outside so he could feel the sun on his back. He was light in her arms, too light, like a bundle of bones wrapped in fleece. On the 9th night, the heat did not break. The barn held the day's warmth like an oven. Button lay with his head in Emily's lap, his ribs moving too fast beneath her palm. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to quit now." But his breathing slowed anyway. She rubbed his chest. She lifted his head. She tried the bottle again, though some part of her already knew. When his body went quiet, the sound that came out of her was small, torn, and helpless. At dawn, she buried Button beneath the cottonwoods at the back of the north draw. The ground was hard on top, and the shovel struck it with a flat, ringing sound. Every scoop felt like failure. Sweat ran down her neck. Dirt stuck to her face where she had wiped tears with dusty hands. When she finished, she stood over the small mound. "I'm sorry," she said. Only the wind answered. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and did not open the notebook. Her father watched her from the recliner. Finally, he whispered, "You stayed." Emily looked up. "With him," he said. She covered her mouth and nodded. The next morning, she went back to the barn. The town never saw those moments. They saw her dragging temporary electric fencing across pasture at dawn. They saw her hauling buckets of composted manure in the pickup bed. They saw her dividing the land into narrow paddocks instead of turning the herd loose across all 42 acres. To them, it looked like a girl playing with string and sick animals. To Emily, every fence line was a sentence in the land's recovery. She started with the worst ground near the old sheep barn. The alpacas grazed it lightly, then moved on. She did not let them chew plants down to dirt. She did not let them stand in one place long enough to compact the soil. After they moved, she dragged the paddock with an old section of chain-link fence, scattering their pellet-like manure across the surface. Then the ground rested. Rest was the part nobody respected, because rest looked like doing nothing. Emily knew better. After a late June thunderstorm, she knelt in the first rested paddock. On the neighbor's side of the fence, water had run downhill in brown sheets. On her side, the water had slowed. Tiny stems of grass stood through the residue. The soil pressed together differently in her palm. It held shape. She wrote it down. 2 weeks later, she found earthworms beneath a patch of old manure near the barn. Not many, but enough to make her smile for the first time in days. Then July arrived like punishment. The sky turned white with heat. By 10 in the morning, metal gate latches were too hot to touch barehanded. Dust slipped through window screens and settled on plates inside the kitchen cabinets. Grasshoppers clicked through weeds in dry, electric bursts. The creek bed smelled of warm stone. Every step across the pasture made the ground crackle. The wind did not cool anything. It came over the fields hot and bitter, carrying the smell of baked sage, dry manure, and distant wildfire smoke. Trough water warmed by noon. The alpacas stood in the thin shade of the barn, mouths slightly open, bodies still tired from all they had survived. Emily worked before sunrise and after dark. In the middle of the day, she checked water, shade, and weak animals, moving slowly, because moving fast made her dizzy. Sweat dried almost as soon as it appeared. Salt crusted on her shirt. Her lips split. Her hands cracked until iodine stung them raw. Across the county, pastures browned out. Cattle bawled at empty feed bunks. Hay trucks came from farther away, and every bale cost more than the last. At the feed store, men no longer joked as loudly, because too many of them were deciding which animals to sell. One afternoon, Ray Donner stared at the hay price written on cardboard. "That can't be right," he said. The clerk shrugged. "That's delivered price. Take it or leave it." When Emily came in for mineral blocks, no one mentioned sweaters. Still, Carter Farm had no cushion. Her stored hay would not carry 86 alpacas through a long drought if the pasture failed. The bank deadline was 30 days away. The tractor's transmission slipped so badly, she parked it behind the barn and used the pickup for everything. One evening, after moving fence in heat that made the air shimmer, Emily sat at the kitchen table with the bank letter open in front of her. The amount due looked impossible. The vet bill sat beneath it. The electric bill sat beneath that. Her father's notebook lay open beside all of them. For the first time, she picked up the phone to call a livestock hauler. If she sold the herd, maybe she could pay part of the debt. Maybe she could stop the bleeding. Maybe she could say she had tried. Her father's weak voice came from the recliner. "Don't sell the answer." Emily turned. He was looking out the window. "Dad," she said, "what if I'm wrong?" His face tightened with the effort of speaking. "Then be wrong, after listening." Emily put the phone down. Before dawn, she walked the north draw with a flashlight. That low strip of land had been ignored for years because cattle bogged it up in spring and trampled it bare in summer. But alpacas were different. Their soft padded feet had not torn it apart. Emily had fenced it carefully, grazed it lightly, then rested it longer than any other section. In the cool gray light, she knelt and pushed her fingers into the soil. It was damp, not wet, not miraculous, but damp. The old spring line her grandfather had marked was still there, waiting beneath years of abuse, waiting for the ground above it to stop being beaten shut. Emily stood with dirt under her fingernails and felt something stronger than hope. She felt confirmation. Then Warren Pike came back. He arrived 3 days later in a black pickup too clean for the road, wearing polished boots and a white hat that looked more like costume than work. Emily recognized him from the auction. He had once advertised his alpacas as elite breeding stock before neglect and debt turned them into a county problem. Now the animals looked different. Their feet were trimmed. Their sores were healing. Their eyes were clearer. Some had gained weight. The second growth of fleece came in cleaner and brighter than the ruined coats Emily had cut away. Photos of them had appeared online through a fiber group in Bend, and people had started asking about Carter Farm alpaca fiber. Warren saw value where he had once left suffering. Emily met him at the gate. "Can I help you?" Warren smiled. "Miss Carter, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Behind him, a second man stepped from the truck with a clipboard. Ray Donner's Chevy slowed near the mailbox. Emily felt her stomach tighten. What misunderstanding? "Several of those animals were not supposed to be included in the sale," Warren said. "Registered stock, breeding lines, valuable animals. The auction house made an error." Emily stared at him. "You mean the animals you let starve?" His smile thinned. "I'd be careful with accusations. I saw them at auction, and I have paperwork." "So do I." The man with the clipboard stepped forward. "We're prepared to remove disputed animals today pending review." Emily did not move. "No, you're not." Warren lowered his voice. "You're in over your head, sweetheart. Everybody knows it. Bank knows it. Town knows it. You can cooperate now, or you can pay a lawyer with money you don't have." The old Emily, the one who swallowed every insult in the diner, might have gone silent. This Emily had buried Button. Her voice stayed quiet, but it did not shake. You don't get to neglect something until it's worthless, then steal it back when someone else makes it live. More trucks stopped. Emily called Mark Ellis, the county agent. The veterinarian came too. To Emily's surprise, Paul Whitcomb from the bank arrived in polished shoes, stepping carefully through the dust. Warren opened a folder on his truck hood. "These are registrations," he said loudly. "Bloodlines, original ownership records." Emily came back from the house with a metal file box. "These are auction sale documents, proof of payment for the full lot, vet intake records, photographs from the day they arrived, feed receipts, treatment records, County welfare transfer notes. Warren laughed once. That's not the same as ownership. Dr. Hale looked at him over her glasses. It is when they were legally sold. Warren's face flushed. He pointed toward the barn. That gray male is mine. Emily did not look back. His name is Preacher. He had a torn ear, rain rot, and feet so long he could barely walk when I got him. That animal is registered. That animal was hungry. Silence fell across the barnyard. Warren stepped closer to the gate. You think being noble pays your note, Miss Carter? Paul Whitcomb cleared his throat. The bank has no claim supporting Mr. Pike's removal of these animals from Miss Carter's property, he said. Warren stared at him. Paul continued, and if he attempts removal without a court order, that creates a legal issue I'd rather not have connected to collateral under review. For the first time, Warren's confidence cracked. From the road, Ray Donner spoke. Warren, those animals looked half dead when she brought 'em here. Warren glared at him. Ray looked away, then looked back. They did, he said. A man who had laughed at Emily had finally told the truth in public. Warren gathered his papers with stiff, angry hands. This isn't over. Emily held his gaze. For them, it is. He climbed into his black truck and drove away, throwing dust over everyone at the gate. Nobody laughed that time, but Emily's real test was not over. The drought worsened through August. Pastures across the county turned the color of old rope. Fence posts split along old grain lines. Plastic buckets warped near the barn wall. The air inside the pickup smelled of hot vinyl and dust no matter how long the windows stayed open. Every decision became smaller and sharper. Which paddock could take one more day of grazing? Which alpacas needed the better shade? Which bill could wait? Which bale could be stretched? Which patch of grass had earned more rest? The banker gave her one final date. If she could not make the required payment, the bank would begin foreclosure before fall. By then, Carter Farm did not look lush. It did not look easy. But it looked alive in patches where other places looked dead straight through. The rested paddocks held low green growth beneath dry seed heads. The north draw stayed soft enough to support late summer forage. The alpacas moved carefully, grazed without stripping the plants bare. Emily cut no hay from those sections. She used them as standing feed, rationed by fence line and time. Every morning, she moved the herd before the sun became cruel. Every evening, she pushed a screwdriver into the soil to feel where moisture still remained. The old notebooks guided her, but they did not do the work. She did. She hauled water when the trough pressure failed. She repaired electric fence after coyotes tested the perimeter. She mixed compost from alpaca manure, straw, and spoiled hay, turning it with a pitchfork because the tractor could not be trusted. She sold every usable pound of fiber she could sort. Most of the first fleece was poor, too dirty, too matted, too damaged. But she washed samples in tubs behind the house, dried them on screens, and mailed small bags to fiber artists in Bend and Sisters. Most did not answer. One woman called on a Thursday evening. "I got your fiber samples," the woman said. Emily closed her eyes. "I know the first batch isn't perfect." "No," the woman said. "It isn't, but the gray and fawn fiber is better than I expected, and I read what you wrote about the herd." Emily gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not asking for charity." "I know. That's why I'm calling. Can I come see the animals?" The buyer came in early September. She walked the pasture, touched the clean new fleece on June's neck, and watched the herd move quietly through a fresh paddock. She saw Emily's records: weights, treatments, pasture moves, rest periods, rainfall, soil notes, fiber quality. She also saw the land. She saw where the neighboring pasture lay pale and brittle beyond the fence. She saw where Emily's rested ground still held low green stems beneath the dry tops. She saw the north draw, not lush like a postcard, but alive enough to matter. By the end of the visit, she placed an order large enough to make Emily sit down on the barn step after the woman left. It was not wealth, but combined with smaller fiber sales, compost sales, and a conservation cost-share payment Mark helped her apply for, it was enough. 3 days before the deadline, Emily walked into the bank wearing clean jeans, dusty boots, and her father's old cap. She handed Paul Whitcomb the payment. He looked at the check, then at her. For months, he had spoken to her like a girl delaying the inevitable. That morning, he had no lecture ready. He stamped the receipt and slid it back across the desk. "I'll admit," he said quietly, "I did not expect this." Emily folded the receipt once. "No one did." Paul nodded toward the window. "I drove past your place yesterday. That north pasture of yours is still green." "Some of it." "How?" Emily placed the receipt inside the green notebook. "Light feet," she said. "Long rest. When the first fall rain finally came, it came hard. It struck the metal roof like thrown gravel and ran off the roads in shining streams. Around the county, the rain hit dry, compacted ground and rushed away brown. On Carter Farm, Emily stood at the edge of the north draw in her raincoat and watched water slow through grass, manure-rich soil, and rooted plants that had been given time to return. It did not flood out. It soaked in. By spring, the change could not be dismissed as luck. The pastures were not perfect, but they were healing. Native bunchgrasses appeared where Emily had only seen weeds. The soil crust broke apart under living roots. Birds followed the alpacas for insects. The compost pile became dark and sweet-smelling. The herd grew calmer, healthier, and valuable in a way that had nothing to do with Warren Pike's old papers. People began stopping for different reasons. Ray Donner came first. He stood at the fence with his hat in both hands while Emily clipped a temporary line to a fiberglass post. "Emily," he said. She looked up. He cleared his throat. "I was wrong about those animals." Emily pushed the post into the ground. Ray glanced over the pasture. "My south field's hard as a road. You think that rest system would work with sheep?" Emily studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. "If you actually let it rest." Ray gave an embarrassed laugh. "I reckon that's the part I ain't been good at." Mark Ellis brought young farmers out to see the pasture maps. Even the feed store men stopped making jokes when Emily came in for supplies. Carter Farm became known not as the place with the crazy alpaca girl, but as the place where dead ground had started breathing again. Her father lived long enough to see that spring. On warm days, Emily helped him onto the porch, wrapped a blanket over his knees, and turned his chair toward the pasture. His speech never fully returned, but his eyes followed the herd as they moved in a long, soft line across the hillside. One evening, after a rain, he lifted his good hand and pointed toward the north draw, where the grass shone greener than anywhere else. The old barn still needed work. The tractor still slipped gears. The bank still held a claim on the farm, though smaller now than before. Nothing had become easy, but the land was alive. Her father pressed his hand against the green notebook resting on her lap. Emily opened it to a fresh page. She wrote about the herd, the drought, the first fiber order, the payment receipt, and the way the rain had soaked into the north draw instead of running away. Then she added one more line. "Button is buried where the grass came back first." Her father read it slowly. His hand trembled over the page. "Good," he whispered. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Some would say Emily saved the alpacas. Some would say the alpacas saved her. Some would say the drought proved her right. Some would say Warren Pike's return made the town finally pay attention. Emily never separated those things. The neglected herd had forced her to become careful. The damaged land had forced her to become patient. The laughter had taught her silence. The debt had taught her discipline. And the notebooks had reminded her that a farm is not saved by pride, but by listening closely enough to learn what the land is asking for. The day she painted the Carter Farm sign at the front gate, she did not change the family name. She only added 3 small words beneath it: light feet, long rest. By then, the people who once slowed down to laugh still slowed down on the dirt road. But now they slowed to look at the green strip along the draw, the repaired fences, the healthy alpacas, and the young woman walking the pasture with a notebook in one hand and a coil of fence wire in the other. Emily never waved like she had won. She did not need to. Every animal, stepping softly across that recovering ground, was proof. Every blade of grass pushing through the old hard soil was proof. Every paid receipt folded into her father's notebook was proof. Carter Farm had not been rescued by a miracle. It had been rescued by 86 unwanted alpacas, one stubborn daughter, and a kind of wisdom quiet enough that most people mistook it for foolishness until the land itself began to answer.